into Iowa water with Iowa CCI. Because water is life, let's make the wrongs right. We talk, we act, we get things done. We're diving deep into Iowa water with Iowa CCI.
Beautiful.
Welcome to part 2 of Iowa CCI's video series, Deep Dive into Iowa Water. I will be one of your hosts today. My name is Vernie, pronouns they, them, and I am a proud member of Iowa CCI's Clean Water Action Team.
And I will be your other host, Sierra, pronouns she, her. Thank you for tuning in with us today.
In our last episode, we talked with Dr. Sylvia Secchi from the University of Iowa and Graham Gillette of Des Moines Waterworks and learned about how Iowa's water quality affects our drinking water and how pollution from Big Ag has a hand in it. From Des Moines Waterworks treatment to rural private wells, we learned that it's all interconnected.
In today's episode, we will be taking a deep dive into the important topic of environmental racism. We will be talking with some amazing guests about how this topic connects to the inspiring work that they do. Our first guest today is Trisha Etringer, the Director of Operations for Great Plains Action Society. Hello, Trisha. Thank you for taking the time to talk with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks to the industrialized farming that white settlers brought to Iowa, the rivers, lakes, and streams that fall within the border of the state of Iowa are some of the most polluted. I'd like to kick everything off today by asking you to introduce yourself and the work that you do with Great Plains Action Society.
Again, thank you so much for having me. My name is Trisha Etringer, and I'm an enrolled member of the Winnebago Tribe of Nebraska. I also work as the Director of Operations for Great Plains Action Society, and we are an Indigenous-led nonprofit organization, solely kind of started out in Iowa, and then the founder, Christine Nobis, went up to Standing Rock and was a part of that. And then she came back to Iowa and created Little Creek Camp. And so from there, we kind of built that platform. I myself have been invested in, as far as fighting for the water, for the climate. And I think that living in Iowa, it's just an ongoing fight that just never seems to end. It's with our platform, we kind of look at colonization and look through the lens of how can we decolonize. So that's looking at different systems, ideologies, concepts. So with that, when we're in this fight for better water, clean air, just a clean environment overall, we have to look back at how did this start? How did this begin? So on our platform, we like to kind of address the beginning, the first contact with settlers. And, more or less it's, we have this militarization of police that protect these private companies, big corporations, banks. So our goal is to address that and bring that out, disrupt it, and divest from big banks like Wells Fargo, U.S. Bank, a lot of things and a lot of issues tie into that. So we have the missing and murdered Indigenous women. I like to say relatives because I think our men and children are important too as well. Two spirits as well too. A lot of layers go with that. First and foremost, this is the first inhabitants' land. So we have to always remember that this has been going on for more than 500 years. This was like I said, the history of our land, our history of the land is that we are connected to the water, we are connected to the environment, we are connected to our relatives, which are animals. So when we had the first contact with settlers, a lot of that changed, and it was very violent, and it was very unjust, and it still is today. And it hasn't really changed much. It just changed its face. So on our platform, we like to address those things and talk about it and get really real. And sometimes they're uncomfortable conversations, but then we have to have those because we have to have our allies understand where we're coming from, and that we don't need people to act like us. We don't need people to come and, share our history. We can do that ourselves, but we do need allies to stand up and fight with us. So that's kind of what we look at. I did write an article too as well on our website, which is at greatplainsaction.org. I talk about this in very detail, and it's not just the indigenous peoples, it's people of color in general. This was, this whole land was basically built on stolen land by hiring cheap labor, not hiring, but forcing, our Black community to engage in that, and that wasn't right. So, oh, sorry, I was looking at the chat. So what I want to kind of end this answer with is, water is life. That is definitely right. Water is life. There is some scientific research that actually that says that DNA is actually held together by water. They're hydro. I'm not sure what the technical term is, but more or less our DNA is bonded by water. So these are things that we've always talked about, and we've known these things. We didn't need science to basically say what we've already known. So this is why traditional ecological knowledge is so important, to return it back to the original, state of the environment. We don't need CAFOs. We don't need big fancy big egg and just destroying our environment. We've done this before. We've lived on these lands before. So that's kind of what we focus on, is looking at the big egg and CAFOs and big corporations. We have Line 3 going on. We have, Dakota Access Pipeline is still illegally operating. And we just killed KXL. So it is possible. A lot of people look and, I even caught, personal, family members or, just relatives or, just people in general. They're like, you're never going to do that. That's impossible. Nothing is impossible. So if the KXL can be dead and it's because of a collaborative effort, then we need to start doing that with Line 3. We need to start doing that with Dakota Access Pipeline. We need to start putting pressure on legislators. I'm a big advocate for voting, which is it's a very complicated thing within the indigenous communities and BIPOC communities in general. But that's why we don't, we have to use all these systems together. We have to disrupt, vote, and disrupt. So, yes.
Wow. Thank you for sharing all the important work you are doing at Great Plains Action Society. Like we mentioned at the beginning, our topic is environmental racism. Indigenous communities have been directly impacted by this. For folks that are newer to this concept but want to learn more, what are one or two things that people can do to get educated and take action?
Oh man. So you can definitely get educated by following BIPOC grassroots organizations, such as ourselves, or there's other grassroots organizers and organizations too as well. I think really what it really comes down to is really understanding the history of the land, and where you're at, and kind of going through that. How did it change? How did it come to be? Address some of these concepts and ideologies, and you'll find that sometimes it's really hard to talk about that, and it's hard to kind of be in your own skin, and look at the different layers. I think that indigenous communities, they just get not overlooked, but they have this voice and they have this story, and it just needs to be out there. But it's just so hard, because there's just so many layers of colonization, modern day colonization, that just doesn't allow for that. So I think that if you support indigenous communities, and that's really where the fight is too, because we do have tribal sovereignty of these lands. So if we're able to do that and claim that back, then, you know, the government, that's a fight that we can, you know, we can help, you know, as far as in the climate change or the climate crisis fight. I think that another thing you can do is to, you know, it's just really, it's just kind of like looking at yourself too, like I said, and other things around in the environment. We have Line 3, we have the Dakota Access Pipeline. These are very recent battles, and to really look at those and see how the government responses were to the Line 3 and to Dakota Access Pipeline. We have, you know, we have militarized police. We have, you know, the water. What is it? The water. What is it? The water. I can't think of the word. Water. They were shooting water at water protectors so high pressure water. Yeah. So they were North Dakota police force was shooting high pressured water at water protectors. And that was an effort to basically fight for and stand up for Dakota Access Pipeline and the big oil, basically. So we came with, you know, the intention to protect the water, protect our, you know, our water that we rely on and we have that connection with. So, but then, you know, fast forward, then we have, you know, Mr. Trump as our president, and we have people that are, you know, storming the Capitol, and they don't get the same response. So that is something that people need to realize, you know, and we have to think about this, you know, okay, now police are supposed to be independent, you know, their own thing, but we're paying them, we're taxpayers, we're paying them to do their job, and that's to protect us, not big oil, not CAFOs, not big ag, to protect the citizens of society. So that's just one example to kind of look at, but it's not that hard if you dig deep. So that's kind of what I have to say on that.
Thank you so much for talking with us today, Trisha. Environmental racism is such an important topic to start talking about more, because there is no environmental justice without racial justice. A step to breaking down these barriers is to talk about the current situation we are in and the most important problems that modern society is facing, which is climate change. Now let's switch gears a little bit and bring on our next guest, Amy Bettle, who is a member of the Iowa CCI's Climate Action Team. Hello, Amy.
Yes, welcome, Amy. Climate change is bringing harsher droughts and hotter temperatures to Iowa. This lowers water levels and decreases water flow, causing more blue-green algae to blooms that make our water toxic for humans and wildlife. This year, the drought is looking to be even worse. There are a few major players that contribute to climate change in Iowa. MidAmerican Energy is one of the biggest. That's why Iowa CCI's Climate Justice Team is taking on this big energy polluter. Amy, can you tell us about the work the team has been doing and what's coming up?
Yes, thank you so much for having me. As you said, MidAmerican is a huge contributor to climate change in Iowa. Despite knowing decades ago the devastating effects climate change would have, MidAmerican ignored the global need to mitigate and halt climate change. Instead, they stayed focused on profits for their CEOs and investors, and actually still operate 5 coal-fired power plants in the state of Iowa that don't even provide power to Iowans. They actually sell that energy to other states to make a profit. So while Iowans have nothing to gain from these coal-fired power plants, we are suffering health problems from the air pollution that coal plants create, and MidAmerican profits off of that suffering. MidAmerican also continually neglects to update infrastructure in poorer neighborhoods in rural areas. This is obvious when there are mass outages, like with the recent derecho, and only some of our neighbors getting their power back on immediately while others were left behind. And this year, just a few months ago, they hiked energy prices for over 100,000 Iowans who were already behind on their bills because of the pandemic after the polar vortex. So we know that when the power goes out or when prices go up, it's Black and brown families, indigenous communities, immigrants, the poor and working class families who are most negatively impacted and can least afford another setback. This has impacted me personally because these recent extreme weather events are not the first time I've experienced the striking impacts of the wealth disparity that commonly exists between different races. I've grown up in Iowa, most of that time spent low income, being food insecure on SNAP and WIC, and housing insecure in Section 8 housing. So I've also seen floods and tornadoes more severely affect low income communities, which are disproportionately communities of color. Severe weather events like that are worsening in intensity and increasing in frequency. The last polar vortex was in 2019, and they are not supposed to happen every other year. Risk transference from weather disasters disproportionately impacts poor communities because building resilience against any type of shock like a derecho, polar vortex, flood, and now the current drought requires resources, and poor people literally have limited resources by definition. The negative impacts also build off of each other and amplify. So when the power goes out, your fridge starts bringing your food to unsafe temperatures, which exacerbates food insecurity. I might sound like a broken record, but a lot of people are oblivious to the way that racial justice and economic justice are so tightly intertwined with environmental justice. And that is just my more sensitive way to say that it's racist and classist not to support environmental justice. This is why I've been getting involved with the climate justice team at Iowa CCI. We've been taking action. We've been working to deliver the message that MidAmerican needs to shut down their coal-fired power plants and better support their customers. We've started on this by lobbying and passing a 24/7 clean energy resolution in the city of Des Moines. Additionally, we need MidAmerican to recognize and remedy that when MidAmerican passes the increased costs from gas shortages to their customers, it hurts people who are already hurt the most. They make millions of dollars in profit. That is too much money for them to say, oh, this is just the best we can do for you. So we have requested a meeting with them that they took a really long time to decline, but they are going to hear us. Another avenue for us to fight against climate change and big players like MidAmerican is on the federal level. In March, we stood together at multiple direct actions across the country and across Iowa to ensure that the congressional representatives that we elected to represent us hear our passionate demand for the THRIVE Act. THRIVE stands for Transform, Heal, and Renew by Investing in a Vibrant Economy, and it's exactly what it sounds like. What really stands out to me about the THRIVE Act is how it centers racial and economic justice. Some examples include creating millions of good, safe jobs with access to unions, investing in Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities as determined and led by those communities, and healing the relationships our country has with sovereign Native nations, just to name a few. And as I've emphasized, this is so critical because we cannot build a more green society without prioritizing equity. If equity isn't constantly elevated in the approach to halting climate change, then we risk replicating the harms committed against BIPOC communities, the poor, and other vulnerable populations. And despite any climate progress that is made, a society that's not better for all of us is really not a society that I want to live in. I see this challenged a lot when we talk about the urgency of climate change, like we need climate action now, and something is better than nothing, and we have to do what we can now. But anything worth doing is worth doing right. It's worth continually being evaluated and critiqued because we all deserve the absolute best. So as the climate justice team continues to organize for a better future, I not only hope that you'll join us, but be a dedicated accomplice in championing racial and economic justice as well.
Thank you so much for sharing with us, Amy. If you, our audience, want to get more involved with our climate justice work here at Iowa CCI, fill out the form that is scrolling at the bottom of your screen and is also in the comments. That link is bit.ly/CCI-climate.
Today we've heard from Trisha Etringer of the Great Plains Action Society, as well as Amy Bettle of Iowa CCI's Climate Action Team. We've learned that environmental justice cannot happen without racial justice, that there are major climate change polluters in Iowa contributing to this worldwide issue, and how Iowa CCI is taking action.
Thank you for diving deep into Iowa's water here at Iowa CCI. That's it for today's episode. I've been your host, Sierra.
And I've been your host, Vernie. Until next time.